Welcome to the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. All right, buckle up, everyone. Today, we're taking a trip to infinity and beyond.
Sounds exciting. Where are we headed?
Straight into the heart of Pixar. Well, at least into the brain of Dean Movshovitz, the guy who wrote Pixar Storytelling. We're going to unpack what makes those Pixar movies so unforgettable. Those stories that just stick with you.
Ah, so it's not just for animation fans.
Not at all. This is about storytelling, pure and simple. Whether you're writing a novel, a screenplay, or just trying to jazz up your next presentation.
So we're using Pixar as a case study, a model for good storytelling, kind of like learning from the masters.
Exactly. Think of them as master chefs, and we're about to steal all their secret recipes.
I'm all for that. But where do we even begin? Pixar has made so many incredible films.
Oh, let's start with the basics. How does Pixar even choose what stories to tell?
That's a good question. I mean, they could pick just about anything.
Exactly. Movshovitz uses this analogy of panning for gold. You could go for a spot with a few tiny nuggets, or...
You could go for the mother lode.
Bingo. And Pixar, they go for the mother lode every single time. They're after those big, juicy ideas that are packed with drama and emotion, stories that resonate with almost everyone.
Like, you wouldn't think a movie about toys coming to life would be so emotionally gripping, but Toy Story just gets to you, you know?
It does. Or how about a world full of monsters who are terrified of children?
Monsters, Inc. makes it both hilarious and heartwarming. Amazing.
What I find fascinating is that these motherlode ideas, they often have a built-in flaw, a problem that exists even before the story starts.
Like in Monsters, Inc., they're already dealing with an energy crisis before Sully accidentally lets Boo into Monstropolis.
Right, or Marlin in Finding Nemo. He's overprotective even before Nemo gets taken.
And that overprotectiveness drives the whole plot.
It's like Pixar takes these existing flaws and turns the dial up to 11.
Creating these incredible stakes, makes you think we all have these things we struggle with, anxieties or fears that shape how we see the world.
It's like Pixar is holding up a mirror to our own anxieties and saying, hey, look, what if we turn this fear into a crazy adventure?
Exactly, which is what makes their story so relatable. They take those universal human experiences and make them larger than life.
Now, one of my favorite examples of this is Ratatouille. I mean, a rat who wants to be a chef. Who would have thought that could be so heartwarming?
I know, right? When I first heard about Ratatouille, I was like, a rat? Really?
Me too. But it ended up being one of my all-time favorites.
So what's the secret ingredient in Pixar's recipe for success?
Well, for Ratatouille specifically, I think it's the way they weave every single detail back to that core idea. It's like a perfectly crafted dish where every flavor complements the others.
Yeah, like that opening scene with Gusteau and Ego, where Gusteau says anyone can cook.
Such a powerful line. It sets up the whole philosophy of the movie.
But it also introduces Ego, that cynical food critic.
Right, he's like the voice of doubt, the devil on Remy's shoulder.
And then there are all those moments when Remy realizes how dangerous his passion can be.
Like when he's nearly blasted by that old lady with the shotgun.
It's funny, but it's also a reminder of the risks he's taking.
And the supporting characters.
Yeah.
They're all like different sides of Remy's internal struggle. You've got Linguini, the chef's son who can't cook.
Representing Remy's fear that maybe talent isn't enough.
Then there's Colette. Tough, but talented. She's like Gusteau's legacy.
Right. She becomes Remy's mentor, showing him the ropes.
Yeah, and Skinner, the scheming head chef.
Yeah.
He represents the danger of Remy's gift being exploited.
It's like the whole world of Ratatouille is designed to test Remy, to see how far he'll go to achieve his dream.
It's about so much more than just cooking, isn't it?
It's about finding your place in the world, overcoming prejudice, proving that anyone can achieve their dreams.
And that climax with Ego and the Ratatouille dish, it's not just a delicious meal.
It's a time machine that transports him back to his childhood, to that pure joy of eating.
And in that moment, Ego finally understands what Remy's been trying to say all along.
Food can be art, it can evoke powerful emotions, but Pixar doesn't just create incredible worlds, they populate them with unforgettable characters.
Their characters are so memorable, even when they're not always likable.
Right, like when Buzz Lightyear calls Woody a sad, strange little man in Toy Story.
It's hilarious, but it tells us so much about their relationship.
And that's one of Pixar's secrets.
Yeah.
Their characters care deeply. They're not just quirky for the sake of being quirky. They have real passion.
Like Woody's devotion to Andy. It makes him so compelling, even when he makes bad decisions.
It gives him purpose, a driving force, even if it's misguided sometimes. And speaking of strong opinions, I love how Pixar gives their characters such distinct voices, even the supporting ones.
Like Eleanor in Brave. She's not just a strict mom. She has strong beliefs about duty and tradition.
And remember, opposing opinions create conflict, the engine that drives any good story. Look it up. You have Carl, grumpy and isolated. Then Russell, overly enthusiastic. And then Muntz, obsessed with Kevin.
They're all coming from completely different places.
Which leads to some hilarious clashes. And speaking of clashes, I love how Pixar uses a character's past to explain their present.
The flashbacks, right. But they're never clunky or exposition heavy.
Right. They're woven into the story seamlessly, like in Toy Story 2 and Toy Story 3 with Jessie and Lotso.
Oh, those flashbacks broke my heart. Suddenly, their behavior made so much sense.
Exactly. It gives them depth. We see how their experiences have shaped them. It's not just, oh, this character is mean because they're the villain.
It makes you empathize with them. Which brings us to another big question. How does Pixar make us feel for these characters? Even the robots, the monsters, the rats.
It's not just surface level stuff.
Like, think about your best friend. What truly connects you to them?
It's that deep understanding, right? Movshovitz talks about these 3 levels of liking.
Oh, it's like different stages of getting to know someone.
Exactly. The first is that initial attraction based on looks or humor. Then there's the level where you find them interesting, you share common ground.
But that third level, that's where you really get them, flaws and all.
You connect with their world. And Pixar uses all 3 levels to build empathy.
Like Lightning McQueen in Cars. First, we like him because he's cool, but then
we see his arrogance.
And finally, we connect with his emotional journey. Or Wall-E.
Wall-E.
He's not exactly a looker, but you feel for him, his loneliness, his longing for connection.
It reminds us that everyone wants something, everyone has desires and needs, but it's not enough to know what a character wants. We need to understand why.
Like Remy's passion for food in Ratatouille.
It goes deeper than just wanting to eat, right?
Way deeper. He wants to create, to express himself.
And that's why we root for him. But what about those setbacks? What happens when things go wrong?
Well, if they just gave up, it wouldn't be a very good story, would it?
Movshovitz quotes Shakespeare on this one. When remedies are past, the griefs are ended.
Meaning, it's okay to grieve those setbacks, but don't throw in the towel.
Until you've explored every option. Imagine if Marlin had given up after 10 minutes of searching for Nemo.
We lose all respect for him.
Pixar characters are persistent. They embody that part of us that wants to be brave, that refuses to give up.
Like Mike Wazowski in Monsters University. He wants to be a scarer, but he just doesn't have the natural talent.
So he pushes himself to the limit to prove he can do it.
And when he finally accepts that it's not his path, it's heartbreaking, but it's real.
He gave it his all. Sometimes letting go is the bravest thing you can do.
So we've talked about those big ideas, creating characters with depth, giving them obstacles. But how does Pixar structure their stories?
Structure can sound scary, but think of it less like a rigid formula and more like a roadmap.
A roadmap with some cool detours along the way, right?
Exactly. And the most basic roadmap is the 3-act structure. Beginning, middle, and end. The middle's where all the action happens. But within that, there are these key moments that drive the story forward.
What Movshovitz calls the major events.
Turning points, raising the stakes.
Like the inciting incident, the event that kicks everything off.
In Finding Nemo, it's Nemo being taken. Then you have the first plot point.
Where the hero commits to their mission. For Marlin, that's when he gets the clue about Sydney.
Then the second plot point, about 3/4 of the way through.
That's the gut punch moment. Like when Marlin thinks Nemo's dead after the mines explode.
Talk about a twist.
And of course the climax.
All the threads come together, conflict resolved.
But Pixar doesn't always stick to the formula exactly, right?
Right. They play with structure, subverting expectations, but those core elements are always there.
Like jazz music, you have the basic melody, but room for improvisation. So they're not afraid to bend the rules, as long as the story feels cohesive.
And those major events, they're always tied to the character's flaw, making it worse or offering a chase to overcome it.
So in Finding Nemo, each event either brings Marlin closer to Nemo or pushes him further away.
Exactly. And another brilliant thing they do, using subplots and parallel stories to add complexity.
It's like those multi-layered cakes, each layer adding more flavor.
You have the main plot, the action-packed adventure, and then
the emotional story, where the character's going through their internal struggle.
And often a bonding plot, where characters from different worlds connect.
And they weave these layers together so seamlessly.
Like Marlon and Dory, Sully and Boo, Carl and Russell.
Those bonding stories are the best, often starting with conflict.
But as they share experiences, they develop these heartwarming connections.
And then there's that classic Pixar move, the double climax.
The big action-packed finale, followed by a quieter, more emotional resolution.
Like in Toy Story 3. First, the escape from the incinerator. Then, Andy giving the toys to Bonnie. I'm getting chills just thinking about it.
Pure magic.
But a word of caution for anyone trying to copy Pixar.
Oh yes, this is important.
Don't force these elements into your story.
Their structure works because it's organic, it flows naturally.
Speaking of organic, how does Pixar cast their characters?
Cast characters.
I mean, choosing which characters to include and what roles they'll play.
Ah, I see. Think of your story like a machine. Every part has a function.
Some parts are bigger than others, but they all contribute to the overall effect.
Exactly. Some characters drive the plot, others have smaller roles, but even the smallest part should be interesting.
Like that aquarium scene in Finding Nemo, each fish has a distinct personality.
And they all contribute to Nemo's growth.
And even those characters who are just there to move the plot forward, they're still memorable.
Like the witch in Brave.
She's fantastic. She's even thinking of quitting witchcraft.
It's like Pixar saying, even the smallest characters deserve a backstory.
And a dream.
But it's about honesty, you know? Don't just make characters quirky for the sake of it.
Like Dean Hardscrabble in Monsters University. She's tough, but you kind of get where she's coming from.
She's preparing her students for the real world. And even the fantastical stuff, it's grounded in something real, like the house flying away in...
Yeah, it's visually stunning. But it's tied to Carl's grief, his need to hold on to the past.
It's all about balancing those big imaginative leaps with emotional truth. And they're brilliant at creating characters that are both visually and emotionally distinct.
Like in Monsters University, you have all these different types of monsters, each with a unique look, but they also feel like individuals.
And that's crucial, especially with a big cast. Each character needs to stand out. Which brings us to another key element, the villains.
Every story needs a good villain, right? Someone to cause trouble, challenge the hero.
Well, not always. Pixar reminds us that a villain is just one type of antagonist.
So it doesn't have to be a cackling evil genius.
Not at all. In Finding Nemo, the biggest antagonist is the ocean itself.
Wow, that's a good point. It's not a character, but it's a powerful force.
And sometimes the antagonist isn't even trying to be mean.
Like Russell in Upright.
He's not malicious, but his constant need for attention keeps derailing Carl's plans.
It's like he's accidentally forcing Carl to engage with the world.
And Pixar often uses two antagonists, one who's genuinely malicious and one who's more of a well-meaning troublemaker.
That's interesting. Creates a more dynamic conflict for the hero to navigate. And even their evil villains often have surprising depth.
They might seem mean, but they have their own reasons.
Like Anton Ego in Ratatouille.
He's a tough critic, but he really cares about good food.
He believes he's doing the right thing, upholding standards.
And here's something fascinating. Pixar often uses villains as mirror images of the protagonist.
Mirror images? How so?
They represent the protagonist's fears or what they might become if they let their flaws take over.
Okay, now I'm curious. Give me an example.
Think of Stinky Pete in Toy Story 2.
Yeah.
He's terrified of being forgotten, left on a shelf.
And that mirrors Woody's fear of being outgrown by Andy.
Exactly. And Lotso in Toy Story 3. He's bitter because he was abandoned, and he projects that pain onto others.
So he represents what Woody could become if he refuses to let go of Andy.
They're like cautionary tales showing the potential consequences of the protagonist's flaws.
So those villains aren't just creating external conflict. They're forcing the protagonist to confront their own inner demons.
Precisely. It adds a whole new layer of depth.
Okay, so they've got the villain thing figured out. But how do they go from those initial sparks of inspiration to a fully fledged story?
Well, it's a process of exploration. They don't just settle for the first good idea. They keep digging, experimenting.
They push the boundaries of storytelling. Like, who would have thought a movie about a rat who wants to be a chef would work?
Right. It's about taking those familiar concepts and turning them upside down.
They're always looking for ways to surprise the audience. Like a movie about talking cars.
It sounds crazy, but Cars is so much more than that.
It's about finding that emotional core that everyone can relate to.
Exactly. And sometimes the best ideas come from setting limitations.
Limitations? I thought those would stifle creativity.
Not necessarily. Sometimes restrictions can lead to more innovative solutions. Think of it like a puzzle.
Okay, I like puzzles.
If you have too many pieces, it can be overwhelming. But if you limit yourself, you have to be more creative with how you use those pieces.
Like those cooking shows where they give you a random basket of ingredients.
Exactly. The limitations force you to think outside the box. And Pixar does this too. In Toy Story, they didn't include a traditional love story.
Oh yeah, most Pixar movies don't have romantic subplots.
And that choice, that limitation, forced them to focus on other types of relationships.
Like the friendship between Woody and Buzz.
By limiting themselves, they actually expanded the possibilities. So sometimes those constraints can be incredibly liberating.
It's about finding freedom within boundaries.
Precisely.
Okay, so Pixar knows how to come up with those big ideas, create those characters we love, but
What about the endings?
how do they ensure that the ending leaves a lasting impact?
They understand that the ending is the culmination of everything. It's not just tacked on, it's the resolution of all those threads.
So it's about more than just wrapping up the plot. It's about resolving the emotional conflicts, leaving the audience with something to think about.
Exactly, and it has to feel earned. Like in A Bug's Life, Flick defeats Hopper because of his clever plan. It wouldn't be as satisfying if Hopper had just tripped and fallen.
Right. The protagonist has to earn their victory. And even if they don't achieve their initial goal, there should still be growth. Like Marlin in Finding Nemo.
He learns to let go, to trust Nemo.
It's not about achieving your goals, it's about the journey itself. And I love how Pixar uses those subtle hints, those foreshadowing moments.
Oh yeah, those aha moments where everything clicks into place, like in Monsters, Inc., when you realize Boo's laughter is the key.
It's all connected.
And it's not just about individual resolution. Pixar often shows the positive ripple effects of the protagonist's actions.
Like Wall-E saving humanity or Flick inspiring the whole ant colony.
One person can make a difference.
And they convey those changes visually too. Like the ending of The Incredibles, the family at Dash's track meet.
It shows how far they've come, how much they've grown.
Okay, so we've covered a lot, but there's one crucial element we haven't touched on yet, theme.
Ah, yes, the big idea behind it all.
This is where it gets a little abstract for me.
Think of it this way. You have the plot, the what happens, but the theme is the why it matters.
Okay, I'm starting to see the difference. So in Finding Nemo, it's not just about the search, it's about letting go.
Exactly. And Pixar is masterful at weaving those themes into every aspect of the story.
But how do they do it without being preachy? They don't just have characters announce the moral of the story, do they?
Not at all. It's much more subtle. They use supporting characters to embody different aspects of the theme.
Like Gusteau and Ego in Ratatouille.
Gusteau, the idealist who believes anyone can cook, and Ego, the cynic who thinks greatness is reserved for a select few.
And Remy's caught between these two viewpoints.
Exactly. Sometimes even the antagonists embody the theme. Think about Syndrome in The Incredibles. He wants to make everyone super.
Right, when everyone's super, no one will be.
Which challenges Mr. Incredible's belief that true heroism is special. So defeating Syndrome is about more than just saving the world.
It's about reaffirming his own values.
Exactly. And they use objects to reinforce themes, too. Think of the house in Up.
Oh yeah, that represents Carl holding on to the past.
And when he lets it go, it symbolizes letting go of his grief.
It's not just a house, it's a symbol.
And sometimes they use dialogue to directly address the theme, like Dean Hardscrabble's line in Monsters University. We have to work twice as hard to make it half as far.
That's a powerful one.
It speaks to the challenges of being different, of having to prove yourself.
It's a theme anyone who's ever felt like an outsider can relate to.
And that's the power of a universal theme. It connects us to something bigger than the story itself.
So it's not just about Pixar characters. It's about the human experience, those big questions we all ask.
And Pixar explores those questions in a way that's both entertaining and profound.
They don't shy away from the difficult stuff. They show us the full range of emotions, the light in the dark.
Which makes their stories so impactful, so resonant.
So what's the takeaway for us, those of us who aren't Pixar animators but still want to tell stories that matter?
Remember, that theme is at the heart of every good story.
It's not an afterthought. It needs to be woven into the story's very fabric.
It's about finding that universal truth that will resonate with your audience. So, as you tell your stories, ask yourself, what is this really about?
What message do I want to leave with my audience?
And here's something to think about. What existing flaw in your life or the world around you could be the starting point for a great story?
That's a great question to ponder.
What theme could you explore through that flaw?
Now that's something to chew on. So last time we were talking about those antagonists, not the evil masterminds, but more like the well-meaning troublemakers.
The ones who create chaos without even trying.
Yeah, exactly like Russell in Up.
Yeah.
He's not out to get Carl, but
But his enthusiasm kind of gets in the way.
totally.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is how Pixar often pairs these like benevolent antagonists with the truly malicious ones.
Right. So it's not a simple good versus evil situation.
It makes the conflict way more interesting.
And it forces the protagonist to deal with different types of challenges.
They have to figure out who to trust, how to handle these different personalities.
It's a recipe for growth, those internal struggles.
Absolutely. And, even the evil villains in Pixar movies, they often have a lot more depth than you'd expect.
It's true. They're not just one-dimensional bad guys.
They have backstories, motivations. You even kind of understand where they're coming from sometimes.
Like Anton Ego in Ratatouille.
Yeah. He's harsh, super demanding, but
But he really cares about food, about excellence.
he's not trying to be cruel. He just has these incredibly high standards.
He represents that cynical side of the culinary world, the belief that only a few can truly be great.
And Remy has to overcome that cynicism to prove that anyone can cook with passion.
It's about more than just talent. It's about believing in yourself.
And that brings us to a really fascinating point about Pixar villains. You mentioned this earlier, but those villains, they're also like mirror images of the protagonist.
Oh, yeah, that's a great way to put it.
They represent what the hero could become if they give in to their fears or flaws, right?
Exactly. Think of it this way. The villain shows us the potential dark side of the hero's journey.
Okay, I see that.
Mhm.
Like in Toy Story 2, Stinky Pete, he's obsessed with being a collector's item.
Terrified of being played with, basically.
Yeah, and that fear, it reflects Woody's own struggle.
Woody wants to be loved by Andy, but
But he's also afraid of being outgrown, forgotten.
Stinky Pete shows us what could happen if Woody clings too tightly to the past, if he lets that fear take over.
It's a warning, a what-if scenario.
Exactly. And then in Toy Story 3, we have Lotso.
He seems so cuddly at first,
I know, right? But then
but he turns out to be bitter and controlling.
he was abandoned by his original owner.
And he lets that experience poison him, make him shut off from love and connection.
He represents the danger of letting past hurts define you.
And again, it's like he's holding up a mirror to Woody saying, this is what you could become if you don't learn to let go.
It adds this whole other layer of depth to the conflict.
It's not just about defeating the bad guy. It's about overcoming those internal demons.
Right. Those negative traits that could lead you down the wrong path.
Okay, so Pixar knows how to create compelling villains. But what about those initial sparks of inspiration, those big ideas? How did they develop those into fully fledged stories?
Well, it's a process of exploration, of trial and error.
They don't just settle for the first good idea that comes along. They keep pushing, right?
Exactly. They brainstorm, they experiment, they're always looking for ways to surprise the audience.
They're not afraid to take risks, to try something new, even if it seems a little out there.
Like Ratatouille. I mean, a rat who wants to be a chef, who would have thought?
It's brilliant. But they saw the potential in that idea and turned it into something truly special.
It's about finding those universal human experiences, those emotions that resonate with everyone, regardless of whether the characters are cars or toys or rats.
So it's not just about a clever premise. It's about finding those deeper layers of meaning.
Right. And sometimes the best way to do that is by setting limitations.
Limitations. I thought those would kill creativity.
Not necessarily. Think of it like this. Sometimes having too many options can be paralyzing.
Okay, I get that. Sometimes I stand in front of my closet for like an hour trying to decide what to wear.
Exactly. But if you limit your choices, you're forced to be more resourceful, more creative.
Like those cooking competitions where they give you a basket of random ingredients.
You have to work with what you've got.
And come up with something amazing.
And Pixar uses that approach too. Like in Toy Story, they decided not to include a traditional love story.
Oh yeah, most Pixar movies don't focus on romance, do they?
It was a deliberate choice, a limitation they set for themselves.
And it forced them to focus on other types of relationships, like the friendship between Woody and Buzz.
They explored themes of loyalty, jealousy, growing up, all without relying on a romantic subplot.
So by limiting themselves, they actually opened up new possibilities.
Exactly. It's a reminder that constraints can sometimes lead to greater creativity.
It's about finding that freedom within boundaries.
That's a great way to put it. So Pixar knows how to come up with those big ideas, those unforgettable characters, those nail-biting conflicts, but
But what about the ending? How do they make sure it sticks the landing?
the ending is everything. It's the culmination of the entire story.
It can't just be an afterthought. It has to feel like a satisfying resolution to everything that came before.
Exactly. And one of the keys is making sure the ending feels earned.
Like the protagonist has to work for it, overcome those obstacles.
Like in A Bug's Life, Flick outsmarting Hopper, that feels like a real victory.
Because he used his intelligence, his creativity. He didn't just get lucky.
Right. And even if the character doesn't achieve their initial goal, there should still be a sense of growth, of transformation.
Like Marlin learning to trust Nemo.
He doesn't magically become the perfect dad, but he learns a valuable lesson.
And that's what makes the ending so powerful.
It's not just about achieving your goals, it's about the journey, the lessons learned along the way.
And I love how Pixar uses foreshadowing, those little hints that pay off in the end.
Oh, those are so satisfying. Like in Monsters, Inc., when you realize Boo's laughter is the key to everything.
It all comes together.
It creates this beautiful sense of closure.
And it's not just about the individual character's journey, right?
Yeah.
Pixar also shows how the protagonist's actions can have ripple effects, impacting the world around them.
Absolutely. Like Wall-E, his love for Eve ends up saving humanity.
Or Flick inspiring the whole ant colony to stand up for themselves.
It's a powerful message. One person can make a difference.
And they often convey those changes visually, like in The Incredibles, that last scene with the family at Dash's track meet.
It's such a subtle but effective way to show how much they've grown as a family.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot of different aspects of Pixar storytelling, but there's one big piece of the puzzle we haven't discussed yet.
What's that?
Theme. The big idea behind it all.
Ah, yes, the theme. It's the heart of the story, the message that resonates with the audience long after the movie's over.
This is where it gets a little more abstract for me.
Think of it this way. You have the plot, the what happens, but the theme is the why it matters.
Okay, that makes sense. So in Finding Nemo, it's not just about the search for Nemo, it's about the importance of letting go.
Exactly. And Pixar is so good at weaving those themes into every part of their stories, using the characters, the setting, the dialogue, everything.
But how do they do it without being heavy-handed? They don't just have characters announce the moral of the story, do they?
Oh, no, it's much more subtle than that.
Okay, so we're back for the final part of our Pixar deep dive, and I'm excited to finally tackle this whole theme thing.
Me too. It's where the real magic happens. It's what makes those Pixar stories stick with us long after we've seen them.
Right, it's like there's this deeper layer of meaning that we connect with on an emotional level.
Exactly. It's not just about the events, it's about the why behind those events, the message the story's trying to convey.
So it's like the difference between, say, a news report and a novel. One tells you what happened, the other explores why it matters.
That's a great analogy. The theme is what gives the story depth, makes it resonate with us on a personal level.
And Pixar is so good at finding those universal themes that everyone can relate to, regardless of age or background.
Right. It's not just kids stuff. These are themes that we grapple with throughout our lives, like the importance of family, the courage to be yourself, the power of forgiveness.
And you mentioned earlier that those existing flaws that Pixar uses as starting points for their stories, they often tie into the theme as well, right?
Absolutely. That flaw, that problem that needs to be solved both externally and internally, often points to the larger theme the movie is exploring.
So in Finding Nemo, Marlin's overprotectiveness is not only the source of the conflict, it also leads us to the theme of letting go, of trusting your kids to navigate the world.
Exactly. It's all connected. And Pixar is a master at weaving those themes into every aspect of the story, the characters, the setting, the objects, even the dialogue.
Okay, but how do they do that without being preachy? Do they just have characters announce the moral of the story?
Not at all. It's much more subtle than that. One technique they use is having supporting characters embody different aspects of the theme.
Okay, like how in a play, you might have characters who represent different ideas or values.
Exactly. Think about Gusteau and Ego in Ratatouille.
Oh, right. Gusteau, the legendary chef, represents the idea that anyone can cook, that passion and creativity are more important than pedigree.
And Ego, the cynical critic, represents the opposite view, that culinary excellence is reserved for a select few, that you need natural talent to be great.
And Remy is stuck in the middle, trying to figure out where he belongs, whether a rat can truly be a great chef.
It's like the theme is playing out through those character dynamics, those contrasting viewpoints.
It's showing, not telling, which is always more effective.
And sometimes even the villains themselves embody the theme. They might represent the protagonist's fears or flaws, the things they need to overcome to grow and change.
Like Syndrome in The Incredibles.
Uh-huh.
He's such a classic villain with his cool gadgets and evil lair, but how does he fit into the theme?
Think about what Syndrome wants to achieve. He wants to make everyone super, to give everyone access to the technology that gives him his powers.
Right? He even says, when everyone's super, no one will be.
Exactly. And that directly challenges Mr. Incredible's belief that true heroism is special, that it comes from sacrifice, from using your powers to help others.
So by defeating Syndrome, Mr. Incredible isn't just saving the world, he's reaffirming his own values, what he believes it means to be a hero.
And that's where the theme comes in. It's not just about stopping the bad guy, it's about what that struggle represents, the larger idea the story is exploring.
It's like the theme is woven into the conflict itself. That's brilliant.
And Pixar doesn't just use characters to convey theme, they also use objects. Think of the house in Up.
Oh yeah, that house is so much more than just a building. It represents Carl's past, his love for Ellie, his refusal to let go of those memories.
And when he finally lets the house go, it's a visual representation of him letting go of his grief, of embracing the future.
Like that moment symbolizes a whole emotional shift for Carl. It's storytelling at its finest.
And sometimes they'll even use dialogue to directly address the theme, but it's always done in a way that feels organic, like a natural part of the conversation.
Not like a PSA announcement.
Exactly. Like Dean Hardscrabble in Monsters University, she says, "We have to work twice as hard to make it half as far."
Yeah, that line is so powerful. It speaks to the challenges of being different, of having to prove yourself in a world that doesn't always understand or accept you.
It's about resilience, about finding your own path to success, even when it's not easy.
It's a theme that anyone who's ever felt like an outsider can relate to.
And that's what makes themes so powerful. It connects us to something universal, something bigger than the story itself.
So it's not just about watching these Pixar characters go on these amazing adventures. It's about recognizing ourselves in those characters, about connecting with those deeper truths about life, loss, love, and the importance of being true to yourself.
Exactly. And it's what makes Pixar's stories so impactful, so memorable. They stay with us long after the credits roll because they've touched on something deep within us, something that resonates with our own experiences.
It's like they've given us a new way of seeing the world, a new perspective on those age-old questions about what it means to be human.
And that's what makes storytelling so powerful. It has the ability to change hearts, to inspire, to challenge our assumptions, and make us think about the world in a new way.
So what does all this mean for us, for those of us who aren't Pixar animators but still want to tell stories that matter? What can we learn from these master storytellers?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is this. Theme is at the heart of any good story. It's what gives it depth, meaning, and lasting impact.
And it's not something you just add as an afterthought.
No, it has to be woven into the fabric of the story from the very beginning. It has to be expressed through the characters, the setting, the conflict, the resolution, everything.
So as you embark on your own storytelling journey, ask yourself, what is this story really about? What message do you want to leave your audience with?
And here's a final thought for you to chew on. What existing flaw in your own life or in the world around you could be the starting point for a great story? What theme could you explore through that flaw?
Ooh, that's a good one. It's like Pixar's given us the key to unlock the secrets of storytelling. Now it's up to us to use that key to create our own magic. Thanks for joining us on this Pixar deep dive. We hope you've enjoyed the journey and maybe even feel inspired to tell your own stories.
Until next time, happy storytelling, everyone.
See you next time on the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. Until next time.
See you then.